Clara Whitfield pressed her last coin into her palm so hard it left a mark in her skin. She stood on that cold wooden platform in Cedar Hollow, Montana, and did not cry. She had made herself a promise on the train that she would never again beg anyone to want her. But the man walking toward her with a baby strapped against his chest and frost already forming in his jaw looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't asked for. He wasn't wrong. She was. And she was about to become the best thing that ever walked into his ruined life. Before we go any further, if stories like this one speak to your heart, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The train pulled out of Cedar Hollow before Clara had fully steadied herself on the platform, as if even the locomotive understood she had no reason to turn back and wanted to make certain of it. She stood there with her one suitcase at her feet, worn leather, one buckle repaired with a strip of cowhide. She'd stitched herself somewhere outside of Cheyenne, and she looked out at the town the way a person looks at a map they don't entirely trust. Cedar Hollow, Montana. Population small enough that 3 people had already stopped on the far end of the platform to stare at her. She didn't stare back. She had learned a long time ago that staring back only invited conversation, and conversation with strangers in new places almost always started the same way, with a question that was really a judgment wearing a smile. Where are you from? Meaning, do you belong here? The answer in Clara's case was always the same. No, she didn't belong anywhere, but she was still here. She picked up her suitcase, straightened her spine, and looked for the man whose name was written on the letter tucked inside her coat pocket. Nathan Cole, rancher, widower, father. She had read the advertisement 3 times before she answered it, which was 2 more times than she usually bothered. Most job listings she answered out of desperation, reading only as far as the wage and the address. But something about the way this one was written had slowed her down. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't warm. It read like a man who had thought carefully about every word and then cut out anything he didn't strictly need. Wanted, a capable woman to serve as nanny and housekeeper on a working cattle ranch outside Cedar Hollow, Montana. Position begins immediately. The household includes 1 infant daughter, 4 months of age. Applicant must be willing to work hard, keep regular hours, and manage a home without complaint. Room and meals provided. Fair wage paid promptly. No prior experience required. References preferred but not demanded. Apply in writing to Nathan Cole, Cedar Hollow Post Office. No, please, no warmth, no mention of what had happened to the child's mother. But he'd said fair wage paid promptly, and in Clara's experience, a man who bothered to specify promptly was a man who understood what it meant to wait on money that didn't come. She'd written back the same day. That had been 6 weeks ago, and here she stood. She spotted him before he spotted her, which she took as a good sign. She had learned to read men quickly, not because she was clever, though she believed she was, but because her survival had depended on it for long enough that it had become as natural as breathing. Nathan Cole was tall. That was the first thing. He was tall in the way that men who spend years outdoors in hard weather tend to be not built for show, but built for use the way a good fence post is built. He wore a dark coat that had seen better winters, and he walked like a man who had somewhere to be and no patience for anything standing between him and getting there. And he was carrying a baby. The infant was strapped against his chest in a length of cloth that Clara could tell even at a distance he had not tied himself. The knot was too neat, too deliberate, the kind a woman ties for a man who doesn't know how to do it yet and hasn't learned to admit it. He was scanning the platform, looking for her. She almost raised her hand to signal him, then stopped. Because when his eyes passed over her, they didn't stop. He looked right past her. Clara felt something she recognized and didn't much enjoy, the old familiar sting of being invisible. Being the woman in the room that a man's eyes slide over without interest, looking for someone else. Someone better suited to what he had in mind. She had spent 26 years learning not to let it show on her face. She let him look for another 10 seconds. Then she picked up her suitcase, walked directly toward him, stopped 3 feet away, and said, "Mr. Cole?" He turned. His eyes settled on her, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second that most people would have missed, something shifted in his expression. Not recognition. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful, controlled blankness of a man who had decided somewhere along the way to stop letting his face say things he hadn't approved first. "Miss Whitfield," he said. It wasn't a question. That's right. He looked at her suitcase, then back at her. "That's all you brought?" "That's all I own," she said. "I didn't think it made sense to pack more than I had." Something moved in his jaw, not quite a smile. Closer to the ghost of one, the kind that visits a man who has forgotten smiling, is something he used to do. "Fair enough," he said. "The wagon's out front." He turned and walked, and Clara followed, because that was what she'd come to Cedar Hollow to do. She fell into step behind him and looked at the baby. The baby looked back at her. She had enormous dark eyes. Her father's eyes, Clara could tell even at a glance, and she was regarding Clara with the solemn, unblinking curiosity that very small children have before they learn that some things aren't worth looking at closely. "She's beautiful," Clara said before she could think better of it. Nathan Cole didn't turn around. "Her name is Emma." "I know. You mentioned her in your letter." "Did I?" It wasn't a question either. The man spoke in statements even when he was asking things Clara noticed, like he'd decided that uncertainty was a luxury he couldn't afford. "You said she was 4 months old," Clara said. "She's bigger than I expected." He stopped walking, turned, looked at Clara with something that might have been surprise quickly smoothed over. "She's growing fast." "She looks healthy." "She is." He said it with something fierce underneath it, not pride exactly. More like relief. Like a man who has been afraid of something terrible for so long that every ordinary good thing feels like a miracle he almost didn't get to keep. "She's been healthy since she was 3 weeks old." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. She hadn't been healthy before that. She didn't push. She just nodded and followed him to the wagon. The ride out to the Cole Ranch took 40 minutes on a road that rattled the wagon hard enough that Clara gripped the seat rail twice to keep her balance. Nathan drove without speaking. Emma slept against his chest, one small fist wrapped around the lapel of his coat, like she was making sure he didn't go anywhere without her. Clara watched the land open up around them. Montana was not like Boston. Boston was noise and crowd and gray stone, and the smell of river water and coal smoke, and too many people living too close together. Montana was the opposite of all of that big sky and long grass and silence, so complete, it had texture, like something you could press your hand against and feel pushing back. She had not expected to like it. She found that she did. "Have you worked as a nanny before?" Nathan asked without looking at her. "Twice," Clara said. "Once in Boston for a family on Tremont Street. 2 boys ages 3 and 5. I was with them for 14 months. And the second time, a family in New York. 1 girl 8 years old. I was with them for 7 months." "Why did you leave?" Clara looked at the side of his face. It was a direct question, the kind most employers danced around for a few weeks before they got to it. She decided she liked that about him. "The family on Tremont Street moved to London," she said. "I couldn't follow. I didn't have the means, and they didn't offer to provide them." She paused. "The family in New York let me go because their daughter became attached to me, and the mother decided that was a problem." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Was it?" he asked. "A problem?" "Not to me," Clara said. "But I wasn't the one making the decisions." He nodded once slowly, like he was filing something away. "Emma is going to get attached to you," he said. "If you're good at your job, she will. I'm not going to hold that against you." "I appreciate that. But I need to know you're going to stay," he said. "I need to know you're not going to be here 6 months and then disappear when something better comes along. Emma's already lost." He stopped, swallowed, started again. She needs consistency. She needs to know the people around her are going to stay put. Clara felt the weight of what he'd almost said pressing against the air between them. She turned and looked at him directly. "Mr. Cole, I came to Montana because I have nowhere else to go that makes any sense to me. I have no family. I have no other offers. I am not looking for something better because I don't know what better would look like from here." She paused. "What I am looking for is work I can do well, people I can trust, and a place where I'm treated like a person instead of a problem to be managed. If your ranch can offer those things, I will stay as long as you need me." Nathan turned and looked at her, full on for the first time. Not the glance and look away he'd been doing since the platform. He really looked at her the way people rarely do, like he was trying to see something past what she was showing. Whatever he was looking for, she didn't know if he found it. He turned back to the road. "I reckon we'll find out," he said. The ranch appeared at the end of a long dirt track lined with cottonwood trees that had gone gold with the first hint of autumn. The main house was solidly built, 2 stories, a covered porch, running the full length of the front good strong windows that hadn't been boarded over the way she'd seen on some frontier homes. Someone had cared about this place once. That care had slipped, she could see. The porch had a broken rail. One shutter hung at an angle. The front steps needed new boards on 2 of the treads. But the bones were good. That was what mattered. 2 ranch hands appeared from the direction of the barn as Nathan pulled the wagon up. They were both older, both wearing the weathered look of men who had spent most of their lives outside. They tipped their hats in Clara's direction, without being asked, which told her something about the man they worked for. "Miss," the taller one said. "Welcome to Cole Ranch. I'm George. This here's Henry." Henry tipped his hat again and said nothing, which Clara suspected was normal for him. "Thank you, George," she said. "I'm Clara." George looked at Nathan with an expression that said, approximately, "She seems all right." Nathan's expression said approximately, "I know, don't make a thing of it." They were clearly people who had been communicating in that shorthand for a long time. Nathan climbed down from the wagon and carefully handed Emma to Clara. Not casually, not like handing off a package, but with the particular care of a man who has learned that this specific weight is the most important thing he carries. Emma stirred, blinked her enormous dark eyes, and looked at Clara. Clara looked back. "Hello, Emma," she said quietly. Emma reached up and grabbed Clara's nose. And that was that. Inside the house was exactly what the outside had suggested, solid, well-made, and missing something. Every room had the geometry of care, but not the warmth of it. The kitchen was large and functional. The parlor had good furniture arranged sensibly. The shelves had books which Clara noted with something close to relief. A man who kept books was a man who understood that the world inside a person was as important as the one outside. But the curtains hadn't been touched in months. The hearth hadn't been laid yet for the coming winter. There were dishes in the dry rack that someone had washed and set there, and then apparently forgotten about, as if the act of washing them had used up whatever domestic intention had started the day, and nothing remained for putting them away. It was a house that had been maintained without being lived in. "Your room is upstairs," Nathan said. "Second door on the left. Emma sleeps in the room next to yours, that's so you can hear her in the night if she wakes." He looked at her directly. "I know it's a lot to ask. Night waking is part of the position, and I should have been clearer about that in the advertisement." "It's all right," Clara said. "I don't sleep heavily." He nodded. "Meals are the main priority in the morning. I'm out before sunrise most days. The hands eat at 6:30. I'd appreciate it if you could have something ready. For the rest of the day, Emma is your primary responsibility. The house is—" He paused. Seemed to be looking for words that didn't come out sounding like an apology. "The house could use some attention, but that's secondary to Emma. She comes first." "Understood. Any questions?" Clara looked at the kitchen, the parlor, the staircase. She looked at Emma still in her arms, still watching her with those dark, serious eyes. She looked at Nathan Cole standing in the hallway of his own home, with his arms at his sides and his jaw set, like a man braced for bad news that hadn't arrived yet. Just one, she said. He waited. What do you take in your coffee? Something happened in his face. Not the ghost of a smile this time. Something that had a little more substance to it, not fully committed, but present. Black, he said. No sugar. That's what I thought, Clara said, and carried Emma toward the kitchen. She heard him behind her standing in the hallway for a moment before his boots turned and headed for the door. She didn't look back. She already knew that looking back was exactly what this man did not need from her. The first week was a study in careful distance. Nathan came in for meals, ate efficiently, thanked her briefly, and returned to the ranch. He checked on Emma every evening, always the same ritual, sitting beside her for 30 minutes before she slept, talking to her in a voice so low Clara could never make out the words, only the tone. The same tone a man uses when he's saying something true. Clara did not intrude on that. She understood instinctively that it was the one part of his day that belonged only to him. She focused on what she'd been hired to do. Emma was, as advertised, a demanding infant, not difficult in temperament, but relentless in need. The way very young children are, who have already learned that the world requires them to announce themselves loudly if they want to be heard. She fed every 3 hours. She slept in uncertain intervals. She had a particular cry that Clara identified by the third day as her hungry cry versus her tired cry versus her I want to be held and I will not compromise on this cry. That last one was the most frequent. Clara held her. It wasn't a hardship. There was something about Emma Cole, something beyond just the ordinary sweetness of infants, beyond the fact that she was a beautiful child, that Clara felt drawn to in a way she couldn't entirely explain. Maybe it was the dark eyes that looked at everything with such serious attention, as if she was already taking notes on the world for later reference. Maybe it was the way she curled her whole fist around Clara's finger and held on with a grip that seemed too strong for 4 months of age, like she had decided early that the things worth holding were worth holding completely. Maybe it was the fact that Emma, like Clara, had come into the world and found herself short one person she needed. That kind of thing created a kinship that didn't require words. By the 5th day, Clara had repaired the broken rail on the porch. Not because anyone asked her to, Nathan hadn't, but because she'd noticed Emma's eyes tracking the doorway every morning, and Clara had begun thinking about the time when Emma would be walking, and she didn't want the child to catch her foot on a broken rail. She found the tools herself. She found the spare lumber in the barn. George watched her from across the yard for a full 10 minutes before he came over. "You done this before?" he asked. "I've done most things before," she said. "I had to." George picked up a nail and examined it. "Mr. Cole's going to notice." "Good," she said. "That means it needed doing." George looked at her for another moment, then handed her the hammer without another word, and went back to work. When Nathan came in for supper that evening, he walked past the porch, stopped, and looked at the rail. Then he came inside without saying anything about it. But at the table, he looked at Clara across the room, where she was feeding Emma, and he said, "The porch rail." "It was splintered on the underside," she said. "I was worried Emma might catch herself on it in a few months." He was quiet. "I should have asked first," she said. "If that was wrong—" "No," he said. "It needed doing." He looked down at his plate. I hadn't gotten to it." There was something in those 5 words that Clara heard more clearly than anything else he'd said to her all week. I hadn't gotten to it. It wasn't a statement about the porch. It was a statement about everything, all the broken things a man accumulates when he's been surviving, instead of living all the ordinary maintenance of a life that piles up while a person is busy just getting through each day without falling apart. She didn't say any of that. She just said, "I'll make a note of the step boards too. The 2nd and 4th are starting to go soft." He looked up at her. That ghost of a smile appeared again, and this time it stayed a little longer before it went. 2 weeks in there was the matter of the curtains. Clara had been eyeing them since she arrived, heavy dark and pulled close, even in the middle of the day, the way curtains get when someone closes them for a reason and then stops noticing they're closed. She thought about them every morning when she came downstairs and found the kitchen dim before she lit the lamp. On a Tuesday afternoon, when Nathan was out with the cattle and Emma was napping, Clara took down every curtain in the main floor. She washed them. She repaired a tear in the parlor pair that someone had ignored so long it had grown from a small pull to a proper gap. She rehung them open. When Nathan came in that evening, he stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and stood there. Clara was at the stove back to him. She heard his boots stop. She turned around. He was looking at the window, at the way the late light was coming through now, long and golden and slant, the way autumn light is in Montana, the kind of light that makes even ordinary rooms look like something worth being in. He stood there for what felt like a long time. "The curtains," he said. "I washed them," she said. "They were getting dusty, and the tear in the parlor was going to become a hole if it went much longer." "How long did that take you?" "Most of the afternoon," she said. Emma slept longer than usual. It seemed like a good time. He looked at the window again. His jaw moved like he was working on something inside himself that he couldn't quite get to the surface. "My wife picked those out," he said. "She had them sent from—" He stopped, started again. "From back east. Took about 6 weeks to arrive." Clara was very still. "They're beautiful," she said carefully. She had good taste. He looked at her. Something in his eyes was different, not the careful blankness she'd gotten used to. Something raw, like a place where the skin had been rubbed thin. "She did," he said. Then quietly, "Thank you." "For washing them. For opening them," he said. He sat down at the table. Clara turned back to the stove. She didn't make a thing of it, didn't turn around again, didn't push the moment further than it wanted to go. But something in her chest had shifted, settled into a different arrangement. The way things do when a person starts to understand another person, not all at once, but in the small accumulation of glimpses, each one adding to the one before. Emma woke 20 minutes later, and Nathan went upstairs to get her before Clara could, which he'd never done before. Clara listened to his voice through the ceiling, that low, steady murmur, and she thought that whatever he was saying to his daughter up there, it was probably the truest version of himself she'd ever hear. And she found she was not sorry about any of it. The weeks moved the way they do in hardworking places, fast and full, with the days losing their individual names and becoming instead a rhythm. Mornings were coffee and Emma and the sound of the ranch stirring to life. Middays were long and quiet, just Clara and the baby and the work. Evenings brought Nathan back into the house, and the house changed when he came in, not loudly, not in any way Clara could have pointed to exactly, but the air shifted. She started to notice when he was tired, not because he said so, he didn't, but he carried his left shoulder differently when the day had gone long. He took longer to sit down at the table, like his body was negotiating with him about it. She started having the coffee ready later on Thursdays, because Thursdays were when the cattle got moved and the days ran longest. He noticed that too. She could tell because on the first Thursday she did it, he stopped with his cup halfway to his mouth and looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like recalibration. Like a man who has gotten so used to accounting for his own needs that someone else accounting for them briefly confuses his arithmetic. He didn't say anything about it. But the following Thursday he came in carrying 2 rabbits he'd apparently taken at the far edge of the property, and he set them on the kitchen table and said, "Thought maybe George could skin these for you, if you wanted to do a stew." Clara looked at the rabbits, then at Nathan. He was looking at the wall beside the door, making a thorough study of a nail that had been in that wall for years, without requiring this much attention. "I'll put George to work on it in the morning," she said. "All right," he said, still looking at the nail. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his head just slightly and went to check on Emma. Clara looked at the rabbits on her kitchen table. She understood what they were. They were a Thursday. They were a Thursday given back to her in the only language available to a man who hadn't quite found his way back to regular words yet. She put them in the cold box and started thinking about the stew. There was an evening near the end of the 3rd week when Emma wouldn't settle. Clara had tried everything, feeding, rocking, the songs she'd learned worked for the infant hunger cry versus the tired cry. Nothing was reaching her. Emma was not in distress. Clara could tell, but she was awake and restless and working herself toward a full cry that was going to be difficult once it got started. Nathan appeared in the doorway of Emma's room. He was still in his work clothes, which meant he'd heard her from downstairs before he'd had a chance to change, and he'd come up immediately. "She all right?" he said. Low, careful, the voice of a man who has spent 4 months being afraid of the various things that can go wrong. "She's fine," Clara said, "just not settling." He looked at Emma. Emma looked at him. Then Emma reached both arms in his direction with the unmistakable gesture of an infant who has decided she knows what she wants and is prepared to be extremely clear about it. Nathan came in without another word, lifted her out of Clara's arms, and settled her against his chest. He started walking. Not the deliberate, purposeful walking he did everywhere else. More like the walking a person does when they're not going anywhere, just moving. Because movement helps with things that thinking doesn't. He walked to the window. He walked back to the crib. He said something too quiet for Clara to hear. Emma made a small sound. Not a cry. Something softer. A sound that said, "There you are." Clara watched from the doorway. She was not supposed to feel the thing she felt watching Nathan Cole walk the floor with his daughter. She was not supposed to feel the way the room felt different with both of them in it, fuller, like something that had been missing had found its way back. She was the nanny. She was the housekeeper. She was temporary in all the ways that people like her were always temporary. She knew that. She told herself that. She believed it, or she tried to. Emma was asleep within 15 minutes, and Nathan laid her down with the careful economy of a man who had done this many times and understood exactly how light his hands needed to be. He turned and found Clara still in the doorway. "She does that sometimes," he said quietly. "Just needs me." "I know," Clara said. "I didn't want to get her before you had a chance." He looked at her. She didn't know what he was thinking, and she had gotten better over these weeks at not trying to guess, because the territory inside Nathan Cole was larger and less mapped than it appeared from the outside, and Clara understood that entering territory without permission was the fastest way to be asked to leave it. "You're good with her," he said. "Emma." "She makes it easy," Clara said. "She's a very clear person. She knows what she wants." "She does," he agreed. And something in his voice, just a thread of something woven through underneath, told her he was thinking about where Emma had gotten that quality from. Whether it was from him or from someone he still wasn't ready to talk about. Clara stepped back from the doorway to let him through. He paused beside her closer than he usually came, and he smelled like horses and cold air, and the particular kind of tired that means a person has been working hard on something that matters. "Good night, Miss Whitfield," he said. "Good night, Mr. Cole," she said. He went down the hall. Clara went back to Emma's room and stood beside the crib for a while, not because Emma needed her, but because she needed a moment. A moment to remind herself of all the things she had already decided. That she was here to work. That this man was not hers to care about. That people like her did not get to stay. She stood in the dark and reminded herself of all those things very carefully, one by one. And then Emma sighed in her sleep and turned her head and reached out one small hand, and even sleeping, even not knowing anyone was there, she reached in the direction Clara was standing. Clara took Emma's hand, just for a moment. Just long enough for the warmth of it to travel up her arm and settle somewhere she was trying very hard to protect. Then she let go, smoothed Emma's blanket, and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. She thought about the curtains. She thought about the porch rail. She thought about the way Nathan's shoulder dropped on Thursdays, and the rabbits on the kitchen table, and the particular quality of his voice when he talked to his daughter, the way a man sounds when he is being more honest than he knows. She thought about the ghost of a smile she had seen 3 times now, and how each time it lasted a little longer. She turned onto her side and looked at the wall. She was not supposed to be doing any of this. She knew that, She had known it since the platform, since the moment his eyes had slid past her without stopping and then come back. She pressed her cheek against the pillow and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would be more careful. Tomorrow, she would remember what she was here for. Tomorrow. But outside her window, Montana was doing the thing it did, that particular kind of dark that isn't emptiness, but fullness. The dark of a sky with too many stars to count, and hills that hold the cold and the quiet like they were made for exactly that. And downstairs in the house that had been silent for 2 years, the fire that Clara had laid in the hearth that evening was still burning. It burned through the night. It was the first time in 2 years that fire had been laid in that hearth after supper. Nathan noticed. He sat up in the dark of his room and listened to the creak of the house settling around him, and he thought about how different settling sounds when there is someone else inside the walls. He thought about the curtains. He thought about the porch rail. He thought about Emma reaching for Clara on the platform, the way she had grabbed Clara's nose, that immediate, uncomplicated declaration of connection that only very small children can make before they learn to be afraid of wanting too much. He lay back against his pillow and looked at the ceiling. He told himself what he always told himself in the dark, that the ranch needed tending, that Emma needed stability, that he had done the right thing hiring someone capable. That was all. He believed it. Or he tried to. But the fire was still burning downstairs, and the house was warm, in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. And somewhere down the hall, a woman who had arrived with one suitcase and nowhere to go was sleeping in his house as if she had always been part of it. And Nathan Cole, who had decided 2 years ago that his heart was done with this kind of business, lay in the dark and thought about the way she had looked at him when she said she was looking for a place where she was treated like a person instead of a problem to be managed. He thought about what it meant that he already understood exactly what she'd meant. He thought about it for a long time. And then, for the first time in a very long while, he slept without dreaming of what he'd lost. The fire Clara had laid that first evening became a habit, and habits she had learned were how people told the truth about themselves without meaning to. Every evening, she laid the hearth before supper. Every evening, Nathan came in from the ranch and walked past it without comment, but he stopped taking his coat off in the hallway. He started taking it off in the parlor, instead closer to the warmth, like a man who has decided to stop pretending he doesn't need something he clearly needs. Clara noticed. She didn't say anything about it. That was the arrangement they had arrived at without discussing it, a kind of careful mutual noticing that neither of them named, because naming it would have required deciding what to do about it, and neither of them was ready for that conversation. The 4th week brought the first real cold. Montana cold was different from Boston cold. Boston cold was damp and mean, the kind that gets into your bones through wet wool and holds on. Montana cold was dry and enormous, the kind that arrives with a particular silence, like the world has drawn a breath and hasn't decided yet whether to let it out. Clara felt it when she went to the pump before sunrise that Friday morning and found the ground had hardened overnight. She felt it in the way the air stung the back of her throat and made her eyes water before she'd taken 10 steps from the house. She pumped the water fast and went back inside and started the stove going, with the particular urgency of someone who understands that warmth in a place like this is not a comfort. It is an argument against dying. She had the coffee made and the stove running hot by the time Nathan came downstairs. He came in wearing his heavy coat already, which meant he'd been listening to the wind before he got up. Ranchers, she had learned, read the weather the way other people read the newspaper every morning first thing, because it told them what the day was actually going to be. He stopped at the kitchen door and looked at the stove. "You heard it too," he said. "The ground froze last night," she said. "Coffee's hot." He came in and poured a cup and stood close to the stove in a way he hadn't done before. "The water trough is going to ice over before noon," he said. "I need George and Henry on that early. It's going to be a long one." "I'll have something hot on the stove when you come in," she said. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You don't have to do that," he said. "That's beyond what—" "Mr. Cole," she said. "Hot food at the end of a cold day is not beyond anything. It's just sense." He was quiet a moment. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He drained the cup and set it on the table and headed for the door, and then he stopped. "Clara," he said. She turned around. He'd never called her that before. It had always been Miss Whitfield, careful and correct, and at full professional distance. He was looking at her with that expression she'd started to recognize, the one that came when he'd arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to go, and wasn't sure what to do now that he was there. "Don't take Emma outside today," he said. "Not until noon at least. Wait until it warms up." "I wasn't planning to," she said. "I know," he said. "I just—" He stopped. "I know you know. I just wanted to say it." She understood. He needed to say it because saying it was the only way he had right now of saying the larger thing underneath it, that Emma was the center of everything, the point around which all of it turned, and if something happened to Emma while he was out on the frozen ground dealing with ice troughs and cattle, he would not survive it. He needed her to know that. He couldn't say it that way. So he said, "Don't take her outside until noon," and Clara received it for what it was. "I'll keep her warm," she said. "I promise." He nodded. He left. Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched him cross the yard toward the barn where George and Henry were already moving, and she thought about the way her own name had sounded in his mouth. Not formal. Not careful. Just her name, the way people say a name when they've stopped thinking of a person as a category and started thinking of them as themselves. She turned back to the stove. Emma was still sleeping. Clara had approximately 40 minutes before she'd hear the first sounds from upstairs, and she used them the way she used every morning window of time efficiently, without waste. The way a woman learns to use time when she's been surviving on insufficient amounts of it her whole life. She made oatmeal. She sliced the bread she'd made the day before. She checked the larder against the week ahead, and noted what they were running low on. She was noting this when she found the photograph. It was tucked between 2 tins of flour in the back of the larder shelf, not hidden exactly, but not displayed either. Set aside. The way you set something aside when you can't bear to look at it, but can't bring yourself to put it away. Clara stood very still. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, dark-haired, bright-eyed, with a smile that looked like it had been interrupted, like the photographer had caught her in the middle of laughing at something and she hadn't quite finished. She was holding something in her arms, but the photograph was cut deliberately by the look of it, and what she was holding wasn't visible. Clara knew without question who this was. She also knew that she had found something she was not meant to find, and that the correct thing to do was put it back exactly as she found it and say nothing. She put it back. She said nothing, but she stood in the larder doorway for a moment with her hand still pressed against the edge of the shelf, and she thought about the curtains that had been closed, and the hearth that had gone unlit, and the way Nathan carried something with him that he never set down. And now she had a face to put to all of it. Emma cried from upstairs. Clara went. She took Emma out of the crib and held her close, and Emma grabbed a fistful of Clara's hair and made the particular sound that meant she was awake and ready for business, and expected the world to present itself accordingly. "Good morning," Clara said. "You have your father's sense of priority." Emma made another sound. "Yes," Clara said. "Coffee first. I agree entirely." She carried Emma downstairs, and the morning resumed its shape, and Clara did not think about the photograph, or she tried not to. The trouble with trying not to think about something is that the effort of not thinking requires thinking about the thing. And so all through the morning, through feeding Emma and cleaning up, and the batch of bread she set to rise, and the slow business of coaxing warmth into a house that the cold was pressing against from every direction, the face in the photograph was present in the back of her mind. Laughing at something. Whatever she'd been laughing at, she would never finish. And Nathan Cole had put her photograph in the back of the larder because that was the only place he could put her that was close enough to reach for and far enough not to see every day. Clara understood that. She understood it the way you understand things that have happened to you in a different form. The specific geometry of a loss you've arranged your whole life around without naming it that. Her parents. Her position in Boston. The girl in New York whose mother had decided that attachment was a problem. Every place she'd been that had not kept her. She understood grief that had nowhere to put itself. When Nathan came in at noon, only a brief stop, face red from the cold, moving fast. Emma was in her chair making aggressive commentary on a wooden spoon she'd been given to occupy herself, and Clara had hot soup on the stove and the bread just out. Nathan ate standing at the counter, which should have been undignified but somehow wasn't. There was something so purely functional about it, so honest, that Clara found it more comfortable to watch than a formal sit-down would have been. He ate quickly, efficiently, without pleasure. The way a man eats when eating is just fuel and the engine needs to keep running. Then he slowed down. He took a second bowl and ate it slower, and somewhere in the middle of it, he looked at Emma, who was making her point about the wooden spoon to anyone who would listen, and something in his face rearranged itself. "She's always like this at midday," he said. "She's very opinionated," Clara said. "Her mother was—" He stopped. Clara kept her hands busy at the counter. She did not look at him. "Her mother had opinions," he said, carefully, like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure about. "About most things." "Emma comes by it honestly then," Clara said. A short silence. "I suppose she does," he said. And the ghost of the smile appeared, and this time it had something behind it, not just the absence of grief for a moment, but something that had its own weight, its own color. Something quieter and more tentative than happiness, but pointed in that direction. He set the bowl on the counter and pulled his coat back on. "Water troughs are manageable," he said. "Going to be a cold night. Make sure the fire's well laid." "I will," she said. He went to the door. He stopped. "Clara," he said again. And again, her name, not her title. She turned. He was looking at Emma. "She ate this morning?" he asked. "All right." "She ate very well," Clara said. "She had opinions about that too." This time the smile arrived with less hesitation. "Good," he said. "That's good." He left, and the house held the shape of him for a moment after the door closed, the way a room does when someone has been in it recently enough that the air still remembers. Clara turned back to the counter. Her hands were very steady. She was making sure of it. The cold night he'd predicted arrived with full commitment. By evening, the wind had come up, and with it, that particular sound that empty land makes when the weather gets serious, a low, continuous note somewhere between a moan and a warning, running under everything like a held cord. Clara laid the fire generously. She put extra wood in the box beside the hearth. She made sure the kitchen stove was well supplied and the damper set correctly. She checked the windows on the north side of the house and found one latch that wasn't sitting flush, and fixed it with a strip of cloth wedged into the gap. Nathan was later than usual. She didn't worry, not exactly. But she was aware of the time in a way she hadn't been the first weeks when he was just the man who employed her, and the hours he kept were his own business. Now she was aware of the time. George came in first, and then Henry, and they both had the tight, careful expressions of men who'd spent the day in serious cold and were working hard at not complaining about it. Clara gave them both soup and bread, and didn't make them talk, which she could tell they appreciated. George looked at the clock on the mantel, then at the door, then at Clara. "He's checking the far pasture," George said. "He said he might be late." "I know," she said. She didn't know, actually, but saying it seemed to be what the situation required. "He does it every year," George said. "First real cold he goes out to check the north fence line. Something about his father used to do it." He picked up his cup. "He won't come in until it's done." "That sounds about right," Clara said. George looked at her with the expression he'd started using on her, a kind of evaluating respect, the look of a man who has been watching someone work and has arrived at a conclusion. "You're settling in," he said. "I'm trying to," she said. "More than trying," he said. "House feels different." Clara looked at the fire. "Good different or bad different?" she asked. George snorted. "Miss Clara, if it were bad different, I wouldn't be drinking your soup and sitting this close to your fire." He finished his cup. "Good night." "Good night, George." He and Henry went, and the house was quiet again, just the fire and the wind, and Emma sleeping upstairs, and Clara sat in the chair nearest the hearth and tried to read, and did not read, because she was listening for the sound of boots on the porch. She heard them at nearly 9 o'clock. The boots. The creak of the door. The particular sound of Nathan Cole coming into his own house. A sound she had learned the way you learn music, you hear often until you can identify it from the first note without consciously knowing you're listening. He came into the parlor. He was cold. Not dangerously, but thoroughly the kind of cold that takes a while to leave a person. She could feel it from across the room when he came to stand near the fire. "You're still up," he said, surprised. "The wind was loud," she said. "I wasn't sleeping anyway." He stood close to the fire with his hands out toward it, and she could see the way his shoulders slowly released as the warmth got into him. "Everything's fine," he said. "Fence held. Cattle are in the south pasture." "Good," she said. He was quiet for a while, and she let the quiet be, because she had learned that Nathan's silences were not empty. They had texture, they had direction, and interrupting them before they arrived where they were going generally sent them somewhere else. "My father used to check the north fence every first cold night," he said to the fire more than to her. "Said you had to see the thing with your own eyes. Said there were some things you couldn't trust to a report." "He sounds like he was a careful man," she said. "He was." A pause. "I used to ride out with him, when I was young. Just the two of us, and the cold and the fence." He was quiet again. "He's been gone 11 years. I still go." Clara thought about that. About the things people carry, not because carrying them is easy, but because putting them down would mean a kind of loss that losing the thing in the first place hadn't quite finished. "That's a good thing to keep," she said. He turned and looked at her. Not the careful look, not the managed, controlled assessment, something more direct. "You think so," he said. "I think the things that connect us to people we've loved are worth keeping," she said. "Even when they're cold, even when they're inconvenient." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the fire. "Clara," he said. Her name. Again. Easier now than the first time, she thought. Like a door he was getting better at opening. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to be honest with me." "All right," she said. "Are you happy here?" he asked. Honestly. She had not expected that question. She had expected the ranch questions, the practical, functional questions about Emma's schedule and the larder inventory and the north fence. She had not expected a man who kept his feelings behind 3 feet of careful wall to turn and ask her directly about hers. She thought about what honest meant. "I'm more settled than I've been in years," she said. "That's not the same as happy maybe, but it's not far from it." "What would make it the same?" he asked. She looked at the fire. "I don't know yet," she said. I think I forgot what happy felt like long enough that I'm not sure I recognize it when it starts." She paused. "But I think I'm starting to." He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. And for a full minute, maybe longer, they sat together near the fire, while the Montana wind made its argument against the windows, and neither of them spoke, and it was one of the most complete silences Clara had ever been part of. Then Emma cried. Nathan was on his feet before Clara fully registered the sound, the particular speed of a parent who has been waiting for danger, even during peace, always half listening, always ready. "I'll go," he said. "I'll come with you," she said. The cold's been making her fussy. They went up together, and when they reached Emma's room, it turned out to be nothing serious. She'd kicked her blanket off, and the cold draft from the window had woken her. Clara tucked her back in, while Nathan lit the small lamp and stood with his hand on the crib rail. Emma looked up at both of them. At Nathan, at Clara, back at Nathan. The ancient, uncomplicated calculation of a very small person determining that the right people are present and all is well. She closed her eyes. Nathan blew out the lamp. They stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark, and they were very close together. The doorway was not wide, and Clara could feel the warmth that had come back into him from the fire downstairs. "Thank you," he said, quiet. "For staying up. You would have checked on her yourself," she said. "I just saved you the walk down the hall." "That's not what I mean," he said. She knew it wasn't. She didn't push it. She just said, "Good night, Mr. Cole," and went down the hall to her room. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and thought about Happy, about what it felt like when it started, about whether this was it. She thought she might be falling into something she hadn't accounted for, something she hadn't budgeted for, something that was going to cost her more than she'd brought with her and leave her with less than she'd come here with. She thought about the photograph in the larder. She thought about the woman who'd picked out those curtains. She thought about all the things you can't compete with, not because you aren't enough, but because they exist in a category that isn't about competition, that never was, that you cannot enter because the door only opens from the inside. She told herself to be careful. She told herself this for the third time that week. She was increasingly aware that telling herself things was not the same as those things being true. The weeks that followed were quieter in the loud way that things are quiet when they're actually full of sound that neither party is quite ready to name. Nathan came home earlier. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. By increments, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. The kind of change that could be explained by the work, by the season, by any number of practical things. But Clara noticed that the increments always landed around the time when Emma was awake and available, and around the time when supper was coming together, and she did not think the timing was accidental. He started staying at the table after he ate, just for a few minutes at first, then longer. He would have another cup of coffee, and he would ask questions about Emma's day, about what she'd eaten, and when she'd slept, the ordinary accounting of a parent who's been away. But then the accounting would finish, and the questions would continue anyway, and they were different questions. The kind you ask because you want to know, not because you need to know. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked one evening. "My mother," she said. "Mostly. And then out of necessity." "Were you close with your mother?" Clara set down the cup she was drying. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Until I wasn't. She died when I was 15. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it, she could tell, because with Nathan Cole there was no performance of sympathy, no social reflex. When he said something, it came from somewhere real. "My father went 2 years later," she said. "After that, it was just managing, finding work, moving when the work moved." "Is that why you answered the advertisement?" he asked. Montana was as good as anywhere, Clara considered him. Montana was better than anywhere, she said. "I've been to a lot of anywheres, Mr. Cole. Most of them looked the same after a while." She paused. "This one doesn't." He looked at her for a long moment. "Nathan," he said. She looked at him. "You can call me Nathan," he said. "If you want to." "All right," she said. "Nathan." He nodded once, like something had been decided. He picked up his cup, and in that small, ordinary room, in that ordinary moment, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not in any way you could have pointed to and said, "There, that's when it happened." But there in the way that things shift, when two people stop performing their separate categories for each other and start just being in the same room. It was 3 days later that the letter arrived. Clara saw it on the table when she came in from the yard. George had brought the mail in during the morning, which he did on the days when one of the hands went into town, and he'd stacked it by the door, the way he always did. The letter was on top. The return address was a law office in Boston. She stood there looking at it. She had left Boston owing no debts, cutting no threads she was aware of. She had finished cleanly, or so she'd believed. The sight of a law office name from that city made something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather outside. She picked it up. She read it. And the cold in her chest got considerably colder. The letter was from the office of one Gerald Marsh, attorney at law, acting on behalf of Mr. Raymond Alcott, whom the letter described as a businessman of standing in Boston society, and the former fiancé of one Clara Ann Whitfield. Former fiancé. Clara read that phrase twice. She had thought that was finished. She had made sure it was finished, had ended the engagement herself in writing clearly with no ambiguity, and had left Boston 3 weeks later before Raymond could arrange a meeting, because she had known what his meetings looked like, and she had decided she was done with being managed. Raymond Alcott was not a violent man. He did not need to be. Raymond was the kind of man who operated entirely through leverage, financial, social, legal, and who found that in his experience, these instruments were sufficient to manage most situations. The letter from his attorney informed Clara that Mr. Alcott had become aware of her current employment and wished to make clear that he did not consider the terms of the broken engagement fully settled. There was language about reputation and obligation, and the matter of a necklace he claimed she'd kept. She had not kept the necklace. She had left it on his dining room table with her letter. She had made certain of it. But that wasn't the part that made her hands go still and her eyes go flat. The part that made her hands go still was the final paragraph, which noted that Mr. Alcott intended to travel west in the coming weeks and looked forward to resolving outstanding matters in person. Clara folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket. She went upstairs and changed Emma, who was protesting the delay in her morning routine, with considerable commentary, and she went about the rest of the morning with her hands steady and her face composed, and the letter sitting in her pocket like a stone. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself Raymond was a long way from Cedar Hollow, Montana, and men like Raymond, for all their leverage and resources, generally preferred to conduct their intimidation from a comfortable distance. She told herself she had handled Raymond before. She could handle him again. She did not tell Nathan. She told herself that was also fine. But when Nathan came in at noon that day and asked how the morning had gone, and she said fine, everything fine, she felt the word sitting wrong in her mouth, too smooth, too quick, the way a lie feels when you're not used to telling them. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with that direct attention he sometimes directed at fence lines and cattle. The focused, unhurried attention of a man who is trying to read something that matters. "You all right?" he said. "Long morning," she said. Emma was fussy. He looked at Emma, who was sitting in her chair eating a piece of soft bread with the focused satisfaction of a child who has no idea her world might be about to develop complications. "She seems all right now," he said. "She's settled," Clara said. He looked at Clara again. She met his gaze and held it. "All right," he said finally, "meaning I hear you saying you're fine, meaning I don't entirely believe you, meaning I'm not going to push." He ate his soup and left. Clara stood in the kitchen after the door closed and pressed one hand flat against the table. She could feel the corner of the letter in her pocket. She had made a life repeatedly out of handling things on her own. She had gotten good at it, not because she preferred it, but because the alternative, which was depending on other people's willingness to stay, had not been reliable. She was not about to start being someone who brought her problems to the door of a man who already had enough to carry. She was not. But that evening, when Nathan came in and sat at the table after supper, and the conversation turned the way it had been turning lately, easy, unrehearsed, the kind of conversation that happens when two people have stopped performing and started just talking, she almost said it. He was telling her about a conversation with George about the cattle count for winter, and he was using his hands the way he sometimes did when something had his attention, and his face was open in the way it was getting more often, and she almost said there was a letter today. She didn't. But the almost of it sat in her chest for the rest of the evening, heavier than the letter itself. She was washing up when Nathan said from across the room, "You're quieter than usual." She kept her hands in the wash basin. "Am I?" she said. "You are," he said. "And you keep touching your coat pocket." She went very still. Clara Whitfield had survived on observation, her own of others. She had not fully accounted for the possibility that someone was observing her with equal care, or that they were this good at it. She turned around. Nathan was looking at her with steady eyes, and no performance of politeness, just direct, clear attention. "Did something happen today?" he asked. The fire was going. Emma was asleep. The wind had died down for the first time in 3 days, and the silence outside was clean and open in the way Montana silence is when the weather lifts. Clara looked at Nathan Cole across the kitchen. She thought about the photograph in the larder. She thought about everything he was carrying. She thought about how unfair it would be to add her weight to it. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said. He was quiet. "I reckon you can handle most things," he said. "That isn't what I asked." She looked at him. He looked at her. And this was the moment. Not the curtains, not the porch rail, not the name or the Thursday soup. This was the first moment when the careful maintained distance between what they were performing and what they actually were came close enough to collapse that she could feel the heat of it. "A letter," she said. "From Boston, from a man I used to know." Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in it sharpened. "A man you used to know," he said. "Someone I was engaged to," she said. Briefly. The engagement ended because it should have. But men like him don't finish things cleanly. He's written to say he intends to come west. Nathan was very still. "Here," he said. "I believe so," she said. "Yes." The silence stretched. Clara kept her hands at her sides and her back straight and her face composed because she had practice at this, at presenting the difficult thing, without asking for anything in return, without letting the difficulty show its full depth. Nathan stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for long enough that she started to understand what it meant, that she had been wrong, that this was something she shouldn't have said, that it changed what he thought of her in a way that... "He coming here to cause trouble," Nathan said, still at the window. "He's the kind of man who calls it settling matters," she said. "But yes, I believe so." Nathan turned around. His face was not what she'd expected. She'd expected caution, reassessment, the careful reevaluation of someone who has discovered that the person they brought into their home has brought complications with her. What she saw instead was something she had no name for yet, something that looked at its edges like anger. Not at her. For her. "He's not going to come onto my ranch and cause trouble for a woman in my employ," Nathan said. Quiet, flat. The voice of a man who is speaking a fact, not making a threat. Clara held very still. "Nathan," she started. "I mean it," he said. "Whatever happened in Boston stays in Boston. You're here, and this is my land, and I will not have it." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the things she'd told herself about not depending on anyone, about not bringing her weight to someone else's door, about the ways people leave. She thought about Emma's hand reaching for her in the dark, and the curtains opened, and the rabbit stew on a Thursday, and her name in his mouth, like a door he was learning to open. "All right," she said quietly. It was the first time in a very long time that she had said those two words and felt the weight of them lift instead of settle. Nathan nodded once. He sat back down. "Tell me about him," he said. "All of it. I want to know what we're dealing with." And Clara sat down across from him and the fire burned. And for the first time since the letter arrived, the stone in her chest lost some of its weight. She began to talk. And Nathan Cole, who had been careful with his attention for 2 years, gave her all of it. She told him everything. Not because she had planned to, not because she had decided sitting across that kitchen table with the fire going and Montana holding its breath outside, that Nathan Cole was someone she was ready to trust, with the full weight of it. But he had asked, and he had asked like a man who intended to listen rather than judge. And Clara had been carrying the story of Raymond Alcott for long enough that the telling of it came out with the particular pressure of something that has been held too long in too small a space. Raymond Alcott was 51 years old and had been a widower for 9 years, and had spent most of those 9 years accumulating things, property influence, social position, and eventually a young woman from a reduced family who had the right kind of face and the right kind of bearing and the wrong kind of options. That was how Raymond had framed it to himself, Clara believed. Not as taking advantage. As solving a problem. Hers primarily. He was offering her stability, respectability, a name that carried weight in rooms where her own name carried nothing. In return, he wanted what men like him always wanted, the appearance of a particular kind of life maintained correctly without complaint. She had said yes because she was 24 and tired, and because the apartment she was living in had a broken window and a landlord who was running out of patience, and because Raymond had seemed at the time like someone solid in a world that had been refusing to hold still. She had understood her mistake within 3 months, not because Raymond was cruel. He was never crude about it. He was precise. He told her how to dress and what to say and who to speak to and how long to speak to them. And he did all of this in the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow, with a patience that was more insulting than anger would have been. She had ended it in writing because a letter could not be interrupted. She had left Boston 3 weeks later because Raymond's version of accepting a decision was to keep presenting counter-arguments until the other person ran out of will. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had answered the advertisement in a Montana newspaper she'd found in the reading room of a public library. And she had gotten on a train, and she had arrived in Cedar Hollow with one suitcase and a coin pressed so hard into her palm it left a mark. She told Nathan all of it. He listened without moving, without interrupting, with the complete undivided attention of a man who understands that some stories require a listener who won't flinch. When she finished, the fire had burned lower, and Emma had made one small sound upstairs and then settled back into silence. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The necklace. I left it on his table," she said. "With the letter, I made certain of it." "So the claim about the necklace is false?" "Yes." "Then why include it?" Clara looked at the table. "Because he needs a reason," she said. "Raymond doesn't come after people because he's hurt. He doesn't feel things that way. He comes after people because letting go of something costs him less than the appearance of having lost it. If he can call it a legal matter, it becomes a transaction instead of a humiliation." Nathan absorbed that. "He's coming here to make you go back," he said. "He's coming here to make me feel like I have to," she said. Which isn't the same thing, but it tends to work the same way. Nathan stood up. He walked to the hearth and crouched down and put 2 more logs on the fire, not because it needed them, but because he needed something to do with his hands while he thought. Clara had noticed that about him, that his thinking happened in his hands, that his hands were always slightly ahead of his words when something was working through him. He straightened up and turned around. "He's not going to set foot on this property," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Nathan, I mean it, Clara." He said her name the way he'd been saying it lately, without effort, without formality, like it belonged in his mouth. "I don't know this man, but I know the kind. Men who use the law as a weapon because they've got enough money to load it. I've dealt with that type before on land matters. They count on the other party not having the stomach for a fight." "Do you," she asked, "have the stomach for it?" He looked at her steadily. "I have spent my entire life building something worth defending," he said. "I reckon I know what that requires." Clara held his gaze. Something in her chest loosened imperceptibly. The particular tightness of a person who has been standing alone in front of something for so long, they've forgotten what it would feel like to have someone standing beside them. "He may arrive with legal language," she said. "He usually does." "Let him bring his legal language to Cedar Hollow," Nathan said. "Sheriff Briggs has known me 15 years, and my land attorney is sharper than any Boston man Alcott can import." He paused. "You're not going back to Boston, Clara." She was very still. "You don't have to say that," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true." She looked at the fire. She was trying very hard not to feel the thing she was feeling, because feeling it meant having to decide what to do about it, and she was not ready for that decision. "All right," she said, quietly. "All right," he said. He said goodnight and went upstairs, and Clara sat with the dying fire for a long time. She was not going back to Boston. Nathan had said so. She had believed him. She hadn't believed a man that quickly or that completely since before she knew how much that could cost. She sat there in the warm dark and thought about that. 3 days passed without another word from Boston. Clara began to hope against her better judgment that it would stay that way, that Raymond had sent the letter as a piece of theater, a demonstration of reach, and had no actual intention of following through. She had thought that before about Raymond. She had been wrong before. It was Emma who changed the temperature of the house in those days, in the way that babies are able to change the temperature of things without knowing they're doing it. She had begun somewhere in the past week to do something new. She had begun to reach for both of them. Not alternately, not one and then the other, but both simultaneously with the uncomplicated logic of a child who has identified her people and sees no reason to rank them. When Nathan came in of an evening, Emma reached for him. When Clara came into the room, Emma reached for her. And when both of them were present, Emma looked back and forth between them with the expression of someone who has arranged things exactly as she intended and is satisfied with the result. Nathan noticed. He didn't say anything about it directly. But one evening, he came in to find Clara on the rug with Emma, who had progressed from rolling to something that was almost but not quite crawling, a purposeful, determined squirming that covered ground despite itself, and he sat down on the floor without being asked. On the floor, in his work clothes, cross-legged on the parlor rug. Clara looked at him. He looked at Emma. George says she's going to walk before she's 10 months, he said. George may be right, Clara said. George usually is, he said. It's irritating. Clara laughed. It surprised her when it happened the way real laughter surprises a person who's been careful with their amusement, full and unguarded there and gone. She pressed her hand over her mouth a half-second after the fact. Nathan was looking at her. Not with the controlled, managed expression, with something open and present. You should do that more, he said. Do what? Laugh like you mean it, he said. Clara lowered her hand. She didn't have an answer for that. Emma, apparently deciding they had paid insufficient attention to her progress, executed a squirm of particular determination and arrived at Nathan's knee, where she grabbed his trouser leg and looked up at him with an expression of complete triumph. Nathan picked her up. Emma grabbed his collar. He said something quiet to her in that voice Clara had heard through the ceiling, the true voice, the one he kept for after hours. And sitting on the parlor rug in the last light of a November evening with Emma between them and the fire going, and the Montana cold pressing against the windows like it wanted in, Clara thought this. Not a place, not a circumstance. This specific configuration of people in this specific room. She thought, I am going to miss this, not because she was leaving, but because the wanting of it was so sharp and so present that missing it felt like the only honest response, the only feeling large enough to contain what she was not quite letting herself feel. Then the sound came. Horses on the road. Multiple horses moving at the deliberate pace of people who are arriving rather than passing through. Nathan heard it at the same time she did. She saw it in the way his attention shifted, not dramatically, not with alarm, but with the particular quality of a man whose instincts have been trained by years of being responsible for things that require protection. He handed Emma to Clara and stood up. He went to the window. Clara watched his face. She saw the moment he identified what he was looking at. His jaw set. George, he called loud enough to carry. George appeared from the kitchen corridor where he'd been doing something with the tack. Boss, who's at the end of the road? George looked. A pause. Carriage, George said. Nice one, and 2 riders. Nathan? Clara said. Quiet. She already knew. He turned and looked at her. Stay inside, he said. Nathan. Clara. His voice had changed. Not harder exactly, clearer, like a man who has made a decision and is not entertaining alternatives. Stay inside with Emma. She looked at him for a moment. She wanted to argue. She was not someone who stayed inside while other people handled her problems, and she had never been. And the fact that part of her wanted to let him do this, the fact that part of her felt something close to relief at having someone willing to stand between her and what was coming, frightened her more than Raymond ever had. All right, she said. He took his coat from the hook. He went out. Clara held Emma against her shoulder and stood in the shadow of the hallway where she could hear but not be seen from the door, because staying inside did not mean being uninformed, and she had not agreed to be uninformed. She heard the carriage stop. She heard boots on gravel. She heard a voice she hadn't heard in 8 months and felt the old familiar cold of it, smooth and precise. the voice of a man who has rehearsed his words before speaking them in the expectation that performance will substitute for truth. "I'm looking for a Miss Clara Whitfield," Raymond Alcott said. "I understand she's employed here." "You understand correctly," Nathan said. His voice was different outside, flatter, wider, the voice of a man on his own ground. "She's not available." A brief pause. "I'm afraid you don't understand the situation," Raymond said. "I have legal documents that require Miss Whitfield's attention. The matter is time-sensitive." "The matter can wait," Nathan said. "Or it can be handled in town through proper channels with the appropriate parties present. Either way, it's not happening on my property tonight." Another pause, longer. "I beg your pardon," Raymond said, and Clara could hear underneath the politeness the particular temperature of a man who is not used to closed doors. "And you are—" "Nathan Cole," Nathan said. "This is my ranch, and that's my answer." Silence. Clara pressed her hand against Emma's back and felt the steady warmth of the baby breathing even and slow, unbothered by the world's complications. "Mr. Cole," Raymond said, "I appreciate the frontier hospitality, but I've traveled a considerable distance on a matter of some importance, and I would consider it a great personal courtesy." "I'm not in the business of personal courtesies for men I don't know," Nathan said. "I'm in the business of cattle and land. You want to discuss a legal matter? Cedar Hollow has a sheriff and I have an attorney. Arrange it through the proper office. Good night." Clara heard it, the particular silence of a man recalibrating. Raymond was very good at recalibrating. He had many registers, and he moved between them smoothly, and she knew he wasn't done. "I had the impression," Raymond said, his voice taking on a note that was carefully calibrated to sound reasonable, while implying the opposite, that Miss Whitfield might be here under circumstances she didn't fully choose. "I'm simply here to make certain she has options." Clara's jaw tightened. There it was. That was Raymond's sharpest instrument, not the legal language, not the money. The suggestion that she was here not by choice but by necessity, that she was someone who needed rescuing by someone who'd made himself available to do it. She had heard that instrument used on her before. Many times. In many registers. She heard Nathan's silence, and then she heard something she had not expected. She heard him laugh. Not a warm laugh. A short, flat sound that had no amusement in it. "Son," Nathan said, and Clara could hear the precise, deliberate quality of the word, the use of it, what it was intended to communicate about the nature of the distance between them. "I don't know what Miss Whitfield told you about herself before she came here, but I can tell you what I've seen since she arrived, and a woman who needs rescuing is not what I'm looking at." Silence. "You have a good evening," Nathan said. "I won't be repeating myself." Clara heard boots on gravel, the shift of horses, the sound of a carriage turning in the yard. She breathed. She hadn't realized she'd stopped. The door opened, and Nathan came back in, and Clara was still standing in the hallway with Emma against her shoulder, and her back very straight, and he stopped when he saw her there. "I thought I said," he started. "You said stay inside," she said. "I stayed inside." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Something that was going to become an argument shifted into something else, something that looked around the edges like the beginning of a smile. "He's going to go to the sheriff," she said. "Let him," Nathan said. "Bill Briggs will hear him out and tell him to file through the circuit court, which is the proper process, which will take approximately 4 months and result in nothing because you didn't take the necklace." Clara looked at him. "How do you know I didn't take the necklace?" she said. He looked at her directly. "Because I know you," he said. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Clara looked at Nathan Cole, who had met Raymond Alcott at his own gate and sent him away without raising his voice, who had said, "I know you," with the particular certainty of someone who means exactly and only that. Emma made a small sound. Clara pressed her lips to the top of Emma's head and didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "He'll be back." "I know. When he comes back, I want you to let me handle the legal side of it. I want Marsh, my attorney, involved before Alcott can move another piece. I can handle Clara. He said it the way he'd been saying it, easy, certain hers. Let me help. She was quiet. All right, she said. He nodded. He took his coat off and hung it back on the hook, and the ordinary evening resumed around them like weather resuming after a brief, intense interruption. But something had changed. Something had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it, because naming it would have required deciding what it meant, and the evening was already full enough. Raymond Alcott filed his claim through the sheriff's office 2 days later, as Nathan had predicted. The claim was, as Nathan had also predicted, straightforward enough in legal terms, a dispute over personal property. The necklace, plus a secondary claim of breach of promise that his attorney had apparently included as leverage, counting on the social discomfort of that particular phrase, to make Clara more inclined to settle quietly. Nathan's attorney, a man named Douglas Marsh, who had handled coal land claims for 12 years, and had the compact, precise energy of someone who has spent those years winning arguments, read both claims in under 20 minutes and called them paper tigers. The property claim fails immediately, Douglas said, sitting at Nathan's kitchen table with his papers arranged in front of him. She has no property from this man. Burden of proof is on him, and a claim from a Boston attorney filed in a Montana court is going to require considerably more than a letter. He looked at Clara. You have any documentation of when you left Boston train records, anything of that nature? I have my ticket, she said. And I have the letter of employment from Mr. Cole. The letter is dated. Yes. Good. And the dates don't give you time to have taken anything. No, she said. Douglas made a note. The breach of promise claim is theater, he said. It might carry weight in Boston society. Out here it's noise. He looked at Nathan. He's going to get nowhere with this, but he might make noise for a few weeks first. Let him make noise, Nathan said. It could get into the paper, Douglas said. Nathan looked at Clara. She looked back. Let it get into the paper, she said. Something moved in Nathan's face. Douglas looked between them with the expression of a man who has just noticed something that is not his business and is professional enough to keep it that way. He gathered his papers. I'll file a response to both claims today. This should be quiet within a month. He left. Nathan poured coffee. He set a cup in front of Clara. She wrapped her hands around it. You're sure, he said, about the paper? I am not interested in quiet that requires me to hide, she said. I've been quiet like that before. It doesn't help. It just makes more room for the other person. He nodded slowly. Raymond's going to be angry, she said. When the claims go nowhere, he's going to be angry, and he's going to want to find another way. He's resourceful. So am I, Nathan said. Clara looked at him. She thought about saying something. She had the words for it, she could feel them in her chest, arranged in the right order, ready to be spoken. Something true and direct, and more than she'd allowed herself before. She didn't say it, not yet, but she looked at him long enough that he knew it was there. And Nathan Cole, who had been careful with his attention for 2 years, looked back. He knew it too. The anger came the following week in the form Raymond had always preferred, not direct, not open, but structural. A conversation he apparently had with 2 members of the Cedar Hollow Town Council, neither of whom Nathan knew well, but both of whom, it turned out, had done business with Eastern investors at some point in the past, and were inclined, therefore, to listen to an Eastern businessman presenting himself as reasonable. The conversation, as it filtered back to Nathan through George, who had heard it from the hardware store owner, who had heard it from a council member's wife, went roughly as follows. Mr. Alcott was concerned in a neighborly and humanitarian way about a young woman of respectable background who had apparently become employed in circumstances that might not reflect her best interests. He was simply hoping to ensure she had the opportunity to make an informed choice. He was a man of deep propriety naturally, and was not suggesting anything improper about the Cole household, only that situations of this nature, a young single woman in the employ of a widowed man on an isolated ranch, sometimes benefited from a kind community eye. That was the move, not the law. The law was going to lose. Raymond knew it by now. So he went after something harder to defend against. He went after the whisper. Clara heard about it through Dorothy Walsh, the wife of the dry goods owner, who was one of the handful of women in Cedar Hollow whom Clara had met on her few trips into town. Dorothy was a direct, sharp woman who delivered the information the way she delivered most things, without ceremony, standing in the middle of her own store, making direct eye contact. "There's talk," Dorothy said. "I don't want you to hear it somewhere else first. The man from Boston has been in 3 conversations that I know of, and in each one he says something that sounds almost respectable, and isn't." "What does he say?" Clara asked. "That you didn't come here entirely freely," Dorothy said. "That you were in a difficult position, and that the arrangement at the coal ranch is perhaps more complicated than it appears." Clara was very still. "That's what he says. Near enough." "What do people believe?" Dorothy gave her a straight look. "People believe what they're inclined to believe," she said. "Some will always incline toward the dramatic version, but you have credit in this town, Clara. The people who've met you have their own eyes." Clara nodded, thanked her, bought what she'd come for. She rode home with the information sitting in her lap like something heavy that needed carrying, and she wasn't sure where to put it. She told Nathan at supper. His reaction was different from the one she'd expected, which she was starting to understand was a pattern with him. His reactions were consistently not what her previous experience had taught her to expect from men. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't tell her not to worry about it. He didn't perform the easy reassurance that would have made him feel helpful and her feel minimized. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's smarter than I gave him credit for." "Yes," she said. "The legal claim was the distraction," he said. "He never expected it to land. He wanted the time it bought him to set the other thing in motion." "Yes," she said again. "That's how he works. He builds 2 structures at once. When the first one falls, the second one is already standing." Nathan set down his fork. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, not the soft attention he'd been giving her lately, not the controlled blankness he'd started with. Something harder, something with an edge. "He's not going to do it," he said. "He's already done part of it," Clara said. "The whisper is already out." "Whispers die," he said. "The way you kill them is by not behaving like someone who has something to hide." She looked at him. "What does that look like?" she said. He picked up his fork again. "It looks like going to church on Sunday," he said. "It looks like being seen in town with me and Emma. It looks like people having the opportunity to form their own opinion based on what they actually observe." He paused. "Which is a woman who is doing her job and doing it well in a household that is plainly better for her presence." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this," she said. "I've been thinking about it since he showed up at my gate," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Clara," he said, "I am not going to let a man from Boston walk into this town and poison what you've built here. I'm not going to let him take something from you again." Something broke open in her chest at those words. Not painfully, the opposite of painfully, the way a held breath releases the way a fist unclenches. "You can't promise that," she said. "He has resources. He has—" "I have 15 years in this county," Nathan said. "I have the respect of every man who matters in a 30-mile radius and the ear of the circuit court judge who happens to owe me a water rights negotiation from 3 years back. Raymond Alcott has money and a story." He met her eyes. "Money and a story don't always win." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him not because she was desperate or naive or in the habit of believing what people told her. She believed him because she had been watching Nathan Cole for 6 weeks now, and she had learned the difference between what he said to be kind and what he said because it was true. This was the second kind. "All right," she said. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. Just for a moment, just the weight of it. Warm, firm, real, the hand of a man who has spent years working at things that matter and whose hands carry the evidence of it. Then he picked up his coffee. Emma banged her spoon on the tray of her chair. The evening continued. But Clara sat in the altered air of the kitchen and felt the place where his hand had been on hers, and understood that she had arrived somewhere she hadn't been planning to arrive, and that the map she'd been using for her life had not included this territory. She was in it anyway. Sunday came with pale cold light and high clear sky, and the particular stillness of a morning that is behaving itself. Clara wore the better of her two dresses. She fixed her hair with more care than usual, which she told herself was simply because Sunday was Sunday, and not for any other reason. She brought Emma downstairs in the white dress with the small buttons that had been in the chest in Emma's room, the one Clara had found carefully wrapped and had understood immediately was something chosen by someone else for an occasion that hadn't arrived yet. She hesitated with the dress for a moment. Then she put it on Emma because Emma was the rightful person to wear it, and because not using it would not honor the woman who'd chosen it. It would just leave something beautiful unused. Nathan came downstairs. He stopped when he saw Emma. Something moved across his face, quick, complicated there and gone. He crossed the room and took Emma, and he held her for a moment, with his face bent toward her head, and Clara turned away and gave him that. When he lifted his face, it was composed again. "She looks," he started. "She does," Clara said, simply. He looked at Clara. She was wearing the better dress. Her hair was pinned up. He looked at her the way he hadn't allowed himself to look at her before, not a glance, not a professional assessment. A full look, long enough that Clara felt it as something physical. "You're ready," he said. "I'm ready," she said. They went to church, and Cedar Hollow watched Nathan Cole walk into Sunday service with his daughter in his arms and his nanny beside him. And Cedar Hollow formed its opinions, and most of those opinions were not what Raymond Alcott had been building toward. Dorothy Walsh caught Clara's eye from across the pews and gave her a small, precise nod. Clara nodded back. Raymond Alcott was sitting 3 rows back on the left side, because of course he was, because Raymond always found the room and positioned himself in it before anyone else arrived. He was wearing a coat that cost more than most people in Cedar Hollow earned in a month. He was watching. Clara did not look at him. She looked at Emma. She looked at the front of the church. She sang the hymns she knew quietly, and when Emma reached for her during the sermon, Clara took her and held her, and felt Raymond Alcott's gaze on the back of her head like a hand pressing, and she did not turn around. Afterward, on the church steps in the cold and the thin November light, Nathan introduced her formally to 3 men she hadn't met, and 2 women she'd only nodded to in the street. He introduced her as Clara. Not as the nanny, not as the housekeeper. Just Clara with his hand briefly at her elbow as he turned to each person, the light deliberate placement of it that said everything it was intended to say. Raymond appeared at the edge of the group. Nathan saw him coming. "Mr. Alcott," Nathan said. Same flat, clear voice. "Reckon we've said all we need to say to each other through the proper channels. I simply wanted to wish Miss Whitfield well." Raymond said, his voice carrying the particular pitch of a man making a performance of reasonableness for an audience. Clara turned and looked at him. Full on, directly. She had been not looking at him for an hour, and now she stopped. Raymond was exactly as she remembered him, impeccable, composed, certain in the way that men are certain, when they have never had to be uncertain. His eyes, when they found hers, carried the faint particular contempt of someone who had decided long ago that she was a problem that hadn't yet been correctly solved. "I'm well," she said. "Thank you." "The matter in the circuit court," he began, "will be resolved through the circuit court," she said, "in the proper time and manner, as Mr. Cole told you." Raymond's eyes moved to Nathan, to Emma, back to Clara. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest reorganization, the adjustment of a man who has looked at a situation and discovered that it is less manageable than he'd assessed. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said, just to her, just low enough that it was for her alone. "I always know what I'm doing," Clara said. "That was always your mistake about me." She turned away. Nathan was watching her with that look, the open one, the not managed one. He said nothing. She said nothing. Emma reached up and grabbed Clara's hair, which she had started doing whenever she wanted Clara's full attention, and Clara turned to her, and Emma made the sound she made that meant, "I know exactly what is happening here, and I approve of all of it." That evening, back at the ranch with Emma asleep upstairs and the fire going and the Sunday quiet lying over the house like a hand, Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and set one on Clara's side of the table. He sat down. "You were right," he said. "About which part?" she said. "He's not finished," he said. "I watched his face when you turned away from him. He's not a man who finishes when he's supposed to." "No," she said. "He isn't." Nathan turned the cup in his hands. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She looked at him. His voice had changed. Not the ranch voice, not the evening voice. Something deeper. The voice she'd heard through the ceiling. The true one. "When my wife died," he said. He stopped, started again. "When she died, I told myself I was done. With all of it. With the wanting things. I told myself that Emma was enough, that the ranch was enough." He looked at the table. "I believed it. For 2 years I believed it." Clara held very still. "And then you stepped off that train," he said. "And you looked at me like you were going to be fine with or without whatever I thought of you, and I didn't know what to do with that." He looked up. "I still don't always know what to do with it." The fire burned. Outside, Montana was dark and deep and silent. "Nathan," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said, quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I know your situation is complicated. I know Alcott is still a problem. I know you've only been here 6 weeks." "Nathan," she said again. He stopped. "I know," she said, quietly. "I know what you're not asking." He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. It was the simplest sentence she'd spoken in years. It carried she knew more weight than its 4 words could reasonably hold. Nathan Cole held her gaze across the kitchen table, and for the first time in 2 years, in that particular deep way he exhaled. And that was the moment Raymond Alcott, who was watching the Cole ranch house from the top of the ridge road with the cold at his back and his jaw set, made a decision that was going to change everything. Clara didn't know he was up there. Nathan didn't know either. But the light in the kitchen window was burning warm and steady, and from the ridge it must have looked to a man who was losing something he'd never actually had, like something worth destroying. He turned his horse toward town. He was already thinking about who he needed to talk to, and what he needed them to say. Nathan didn't sleep that night. Clara didn't know that. She had gone to bed after their conversation at the kitchen table, carrying those 4 words, "I'm not going anywhere," like something she was still deciding whether she was allowed to keep. She had lain in the dark and listened to the house settle and told herself she had not said too much. That she had said exactly what was true and nothing more. That truth spoken quietly was not the same as vulnerability. She almost believed it. Downstairs, Nathan sat in the chair nearest the fire until it burned to coals, and the room went cold enough to make itself known, and he sat there anyway, turning his coffee cup in his hands long after the coffee was gone, working through something that didn't have easy edges. He was not a man who panicked. He had learned that early that panic was the most expensive response to danger because it spent energy without producing anything useful. His father had taught him that. 15 years of ranching had reinforced it. 2 years of grief had confirmed it. But Raymond Alcott, sitting on that ridge road, he was sure of it, the way you're sure of something your instincts report. Before your eyes confirm Raymond Alcott was not a problem that resolve alone could solve. He had resources. He had Eastern connections. And he had Nathan now understood a particular kind of patience, not the constructive patience of someone building something, but the corrosive patience of someone willing to wait out another person's resistance. Nathan thought about what he'd said to Clara. He thought about her face when he'd said it. The way she'd held still. The way she'd said, "I know," before he'd finished, which meant she'd been listening at a level below the words themselves. He thought about Emma in the white dress. He thought about what it would cost this household, what it would cost Clara specifically, if Alcott succeeded in making Cedar Hollow believe the story he was building. He sat in the cold dark and thought about that for a long time. By the time he finally went to bed, he had arrived at a decision. He did not tell Clara in the morning. He told George to saddle the gray at first light, and he rode into Cedar Hollow before breakfast, and he was back before Clara had finished the morning feeding with Emma, and when he came in the door, he was carrying something under his arm. Clara looked at him from across the kitchen. He set the thing on the table. It was a copy of the Cedar Hollow Courier, the weekly paper folded to an inside page. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Read the third column," he said. She picked it up, read. The column was brief, factual, and dry, in the way that small-town newspapers can be when the editor is trying to present information without explicitly editorializing, while implicitly editorializing with every word choice. It noted that a Mr. Raymond Alcott of Boston, Massachusetts, had filed claims in the circuit court against a Miss Clara Whitfield, currently employed as a nanny and housekeeper at the Cole Ranch outside Cedar Hollow. It noted that the claims pertained to alleged personal property and breach of promise. It noted that legal representation had been filed on Miss Whitfield's behalf by Douglas Marsh of the Cedar Hollow Bar. And then in the final sentence it noted that Mr. Alcott had been a guest of the Cedar Hollow Hotel for 11 days, during which time he had held several private meetings with unnamed community members. Clara set the paper down. "He gave this to the paper," she said. "Or someone who met with him did." "Yes," Nathan said. "I believe so." "He's making it public," she said. "He's forcing a public version of the story before we have a chance to establish one." "He is," Nathan said, "but he made a mistake." She looked at him. "He listed breach of promise," Nathan said, "in a public filing, in Cedar Hollow." He paused. "Douglas says breach of promise claims require evidence of a formal engagement. Evidence of that engagement includes documentation, dates, correspondence, witnesses." "I have letters," Clara said slowly. "From before I ended it. I kept them." "Where?" "In my suitcase. The front pocket." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Those letters would show the timeline," he said. "They would show the nature of the engagement specifically, that it was conditional on your terms, and that you withdrew consent. They would also show," Clara said carefully, "that Raymond made certain representations to me about what the engagement would mean. Representations he did not keep." Nathan looked at her. "What kind of representations?" he said. Clara folded her hands on the table. "He told me I would have a degree of independence," she said. "That the marriage would be a partnership, that my opinions on the running of the household would be valued." She stopped. None of those things were true. Within 3 months it was very clear that what he wanted was a woman who looked and sounded like a partner, while behaving like a fixture. Something moved in Nathan's jaw. "Did you write any of that down?" he said. "At the time, letters to anyone, a diary. I kept a journal," she said, quietly. Nathan sat very still. "Clara," he said, "I know what you're going to say. That journal could—" "I know," she said. "I know what it could do." She looked at the table. "It's in the suitcase, too." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "It's yours," he said. "Whatever's in it is yours, and you decide what gets done with it. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't choose to do, but I want you to know the option exists." She nodded. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded back, got up, poured the coffee she'd made, and stood at the window for a moment with it. "There's something else," he said. The way he said it made her look up. "Alcott had a meeting yesterday with Harlan Webb," he said. Clara didn't know the name. "Who is that?" she said. "He's on the town council," Nathan said. "He also controls 2 of the water rights leases on the south end of the valley, leases that border my property." He paused. "We've had a disagreement about those leases for about 3 years. Nothing that's come to a head. But it's there." Clara felt the shape of it before he said it. "He found the lever," she said. He found the lever, Nathan confirmed. I don't know exactly what was said in that meeting, but Webb came into Douglas's office this morning while I was there, and the way he looked at me told me something had been offered. Or implied, she said. Or implied, he agreed. They were both quiet. Emma, sitting in her chair with a soft piece of bread, looked between them with the focused attention of a child tracking something she doesn't fully understand, but knows matters. He's not just going after me anymore, Clara said. It was not a question. He's going after what I care about, Nathan said, which includes you, and the ranch, and apparently the water rights I've been trying to resolve for 3 years. He turned from the window. He's been here 11 days. In 11 days he's identified every pressure point. That's what he does, Clara said. That's what he's always done. He reads the room. He finds what people need and what they fear, and he positions himself between them. She looked at Nathan directly. He did it to me. He told me he was the solution to problems I hadn't solved alone, and I believed him long enough to say yes. Nathan came and sat back down. You were 24 and alone, he said. I was not careful enough, she said. You were 24 and alone, he repeated, firmly, not unkindly. Those are not the same thing. Clara held his gaze. She thought about all the ways she had blamed herself for Raymond. The specific cruelty of self-blame, how it masquerades as accountability, while actually just giving the other person a second turn. All right, she said. He reached across the table again. This time he didn't pull back. He left his hand over hers on the table, and she turned her palm up, and they sat there for a moment, with their hands folded together, and Emma watching them with enormous dark eyes, and the morning went very still. Then Emma threw her bread. The spell broke. Clara laughed that unguarded laugh he'd told her to do more of, and Nathan retrieved the bread and presented it back to Emma with an expression of such solemn dignity that Clara laughed again, and Emma accepted the bread with an expression that suggested she considered this a satisfactory resolution. But under the laughter underneath all of it, the problem remained. Alcott had found the lever, and he was not finished using it. The next 3 days were the tense, quiet kind. The kind that have too much stillness in them, not the good stillness, the Montana winter stillness that Clara had learned to love, but the particular charged stillness of something building toward an event that hasn't happened yet. Nathan rode into town each day. Each evening, he came back with a little more information, and each piece of information added to a picture that Clara was trying not to look at too directly, because she was afraid of what she'd see if she did. Harlan Webb had met with Alcott twice more. 2 other council members had been approached. The whisper Raymond had started the first week had grown, as whispers do when they find the right conditions, not into a roar, but into the particular low-level ambient noise of a community that is generating the story in the gaps between what it knows for certain and what it finds interesting to speculate about. Dorothy Walsh came to the ranch on Wednesday. She drove herself, which Clara had learned was normal for Dorothy. She managed her own transport and her own schedule, and had the expressions of a woman who had not asked anyone's opinion on either for some years. She came in, accepted coffee, declined a chair with a motion of her hand that meant I won't be long, and told Clara what she'd heard. The version going around now, Dorothy said, is that you came to Montana under distress, that Mr. Alcott is a concerned party acting in your best interest, that the situation at Cole Ranch is not quite said outright, but implied that Nathan has taken advantage. Clara felt the familiar cold, but hotter this time, with an edge. That's a lie, she said. I know it is, Dorothy said. I've got eyes. But the people without eyes are running the story now, and they're running it because it's interesting, and because Alcott's been making himself agreeable, and because... She stopped. Because what? Clara said. Dorothy set down her cup. Because Nathan Cole has kept himself at a distance from this town for 2 years, she said, since his wife. He's been present, but not present. He works, he provides, he's respected. But he stopped letting people in. And when a man does that long enough, people fill in what they don't know with what they imagine. Clara thought about that. What do they imagine? She said. Something darker than what's true, Dorothy said. Not everyone, but enough. She looked at Clara directly. You need to give the town something real, something they can see with their own eyes, not just hear through Alcott. We went to church on Sunday, Clara said. That was good, Dorothy said. Do more. She picked up her coat. The winter social is Saturday. Nathan hasn't come in 3 years. If he comes this year with you with the baby, that's the picture people remember. Clara was quiet. He might not want to, she said. Dorothy gave her a look that suggested she found this assessment optimistic about Nathan's resistance. Ask him, Dorothy said. He'll come. She left. Clara asked him that evening. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The winter social, he said. Saturday, she said. Dorothy thinks. I know what Dorothy thinks, he said. Dorothy's usually right. He turned his coffee cup. I haven't gone since. He stopped. I know, Clara said. He looked at her. Emma will need to be back by 8, he said. She won't tolerate. Emma will behave herself, Clara said. She's very socially confident. Something shifted in his face. All right, he said. All right, she said. She turned back to the dishes. Behind her she heard him say quietly, as if not quite to her, Ruth used to love the winter social. Clara held very still, her hands in the wash water. It was the first time she had heard him say his wife's name. Ruth. She let it settle. Then she said without turning around, she had good taste. In curtains and in socials. A long silence. She did, he said. And it was the same tone as before, that particular woven-through note of grief, and something else. Something that had begun to exist alongside the grief, rather than inside it. Clara finished the dishes. She did not turn around until she heard him get up and go to the stairs to say goodnight to Emma. Then she let out a slow breath. Ruth, a real woman, a real name, a real life that had been lived in these rooms before Clara arrived to move the curtains and fix the porch rail and lay the fire. Clara had understood that abstractly from the beginning. She understood it differently now, not as a threat, not as a ghost that might push her out, as a person. A woman who had loved this man and this child and this ranch and had not had enough time. Clara had been careful not to replace anything. She hoped she hadn't. She hoped quietly and honestly in the dark of the kitchen that whatever she was building here was something that could stand beside what had been, rather than in the place of it. She went upstairs. Saturday came cold and clear, and Clara dressed Emma in the white dress again and put on her own best, and came downstairs to find Nathan in a coat she hadn't seen before, newer than his work coat, brushed clean, the coat of a man who had decided to be seen. He looked at her. She looked at him. Emma made a sound that in any other language would have been approval. Ready? He said. Ready, she said. The social was held in the church hall, which had been cleared and arranged with tables, and the kind of organized festivity that small communities generate when they decide collectively that things are worth celebrating. The smell of pine and candles, and a dozen different dishes, brought from a dozen different households, hit them when they walked in, and Clara felt the room adjust, the particular adjustment of a space that has noticed something new has entered it. Nathan walked in like a man who had decided between his front door and this one that he was done with distance. He nodded to people he knew, introduced Clara by name without category to people she hadn't met, accepted a cup of cider, and didn't retreat to the edge of the room. Clara watched him do it and thought about what it cost him. She thought it cost considerably more than it looked. Harlan Webb was there, thick-set, self-possessed with the careful friendliness of a man who has learned to be agreeable as a negotiating tool. He crossed the room to Nathan within the first 20 minutes because men like Webb always made first contact on their own terms when possible. Clara stayed close. Not because Nathan had asked her to, but because she had her own eyes. Nathan, Webb said, extending his hand. Nathan shook it. Harlan, good to see you out, Webb said. Been a while. It has, Nathan said. nothing else. Giving nothing. Webb glanced at Clara. "Miss Whitfield," he said, with the particular politeness that is not warmth. "Mr. Webb," she said. He looked at Emma, who looked back at him with the royal indifference of a baby who has decided she is the most important person in the room, which, to be fair, was fairly accurate. "Lovely child," Webb said, growing fast. "She is," Nathan said. Webb's gaze moved back to Nathan. "I wanted to speak with you about the South lease," he said. "Alcott has raised some points that I think are worth discussing." Nathan was very still. "Alcott doesn't have standing on my South lease," he said. "He's raised capital questions," Webb said, "about the water management in that section. I think it would be worth—" "Harlan." Nathan's voice was quiet. Completely quiet. The absence of volume in it was more definitive than volume would have been. "Whatever Alcott has said to you, I want you to think carefully about what kind of man would come to a town he's never been to and start arranging people's business within 11 days of arriving." Webb blinked. "He's presented himself as a man with resources," Webb said. "He's presented himself as a man with resources," Nathan agreed. "I'd ask you to look into where those resources have been directed before accepting that as a recommendation of his character." He paused. "The South Lease discussion has been between the two of us for 3 years. I'd like to keep it that way." Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. Clara held his gaze without expression. Something shifted in Webb's face, the particular reorganization of a man who has been given information he hadn't accounted for and is processing what it means for his position. "Fair enough," he said. "Enjoy the evening." He moved away. Nathan didn't watch him go. He turned to Clara, and his jaw was set, and his eyes had that edge, and then Emma grabbed his ear and pulled, and the edge dissolved into something that was only barely not a smile. And he reached up and detached his daughter's grip with the patient expertise of a man who has had this experience before. "She has strong opinions," Clara said. "She does," he said. "She wants to dance." Clara looked at him. "There's no music yet," she said. "There will be," he said. "There's always music at the winter social." He was right. 20 minutes later, the fiddler started, and the hall rearranged itself, the tables pushed back, the floor clearing. Nathan held Emma and moved with her in the easy, unhurried way of a man who has done this before. Not formally, not with any particular exhibition, just the natural sway of a father who has learned that rhythm soothes. Emma's head was against his chest, and her eyes were going heavy because it was past her usual hour, and the warmth of the room was doing what warmth does. Clara watched them from 2 feet away. The fiddler played something slow. Nathan looked at her. "I'm holding a baby," he said. "Or I'd ask properly." Clara felt something warm move through her chest. "Ask anyway," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with Emma against one shoulder, he extended his other hand. Clara took it. They moved together in the small space between what was practical and what it meant, and Emma slept against Nathan's shoulder, and the fiddle played, and Clara thought, "This is real. Whatever else happens, whatever Raymond does next, this is real, and it happened, and it is mine." She held that thought very carefully. She held it like the coin she'd pressed into her palm on the platform, like something small and solid that she was going to keep whether or not anyone else saw the value of it. Then she looked across the room. Raymond Alcott was standing at the door. He had not been invited. He had come anyway because men like Raymond went where the action was, and the action he had apparently decided was here. He was looking at her and Nathan with an expression that had moved past the performance of reasonableness and arrived at something rawer. Something she recognized from the last weeks in Boston, the expression of a man whose calculation has run out of numbers and is down to feeling. Raymond didn't have feelings exactly. He had reactions, and the reaction she was reading on his face right now was the one she had been most afraid of, because it was the one that preceded the decision to stop being subtle. Nathan hadn't seen him yet. Clara had. She made a choice. She looked away from Raymond. She looked at Nathan. "He's here," she said quietly. Nathan's arm tightened slightly around Emma. He didn't look toward the door. "What's he doing?" he said. "Standing," she said. "Watching." "Let him watch," Nathan said. "Nathan." "Clara." He looked at her. Direct, steady, the same look he'd had on the church steps. "We are not going to let Raymond Alcott determine what this evening is. You understand me?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. The fiddle moved into something slower still. Clara did not look at the door again, but she felt Raymond in the room the way you feel weather coming before it arrives, in the quality of the air, in the way things hold themselves. He made his move 20 minutes later. He didn't do it dramatically. That was never Raymond's method. He moved through the room, the way water moves through a space, finding the channels, taking the paths of least resistance, arriving where he needed to be, without appearing to have aimed at it. He arrived at the group of people Nathan was speaking with, the sheriff, Bill Briggs, and two of the older ranchers Nathan had known for years. He arrived as if he'd simply been passing through, and he stopped, and he said something to one of the ranchers that was apparently friendly enough to constitute an introduction, and within a few minutes, he was part of the group. Clara watched from across the room where she was standing with Dorothy. "Here it comes," Dorothy said low. "Yes," Clara said. "What is he going to do?" Dorothy said. "Something that looks like nothing," Clara said. "He's very good at that." Dorothy looked at her. "You're not frightened?" Dorothy said. Clara considered that. "I was," she said. "For a long time I was." She watched Raymond across the room, the way he stood, the way he was already performing the reasonable man version of himself for the ranchers, while keeping Nathan in his peripheral attention. "I'm not anymore. I think that's what he didn't account for. He's used to the version of me that was still afraid." "What changed?" Dorothy said. Clara thought about the fire on the first cold evening. The curtains opened. Emma's hand reaching in the dark. Nathan's hand over hers on the kitchen table. "I stopped running," she said. "And it turns out things look different when you're standing still." Across the room, something shifted in the group. Bill Briggs, who was a compact, watchful man, who had been sheriff for 9 years, and who had, in Clara's limited observation, the particular gift of accurate people reading that long experience in his job tended to produce. Bill Briggs was looking at Raymond with an expression that was polite and evaluating, and not entirely warm. Nathan said something. Raymond said something back. Bill looked at Nathan. Clara could not hear it. She could only read it from across the noisy room, in the angles of shoulders and the economy of gestures. Then something happened that she had not expected. Raymond smiled. Not the performance smile she knew. Something underneath that something that looked briefly and surprisingly like a genuine reaction. Like a man who has stepped into a room expecting to find the advantage and has discovered for the first time that he is not the most capable person present. He said something else, shorter. Nathan said nothing. Bill Briggs said something. Raymond nodded once. Then he set down his cup, thanked someone for something, and left. Just like that. Clara stared at the door. Nathan crossed the room to her. Emma was awake again, having apparently determined that she'd missed something worth watching. "What happened?" Clara said. Nathan looked at the door where Raymond had exited. Bill told him the circuit court had declined to hear the property claim, he said. Insufficient evidence. Formal notice was sent to his attorney this afternoon. Clara went very still. "Today?" she said. "Douglas had been pushing for an expedited review," Nathan said. "He called in some time. The judge agreed." "The breach of promise claim," she said. "Still pending?" Nathan said. "But without the property claim anchoring it, it doesn't have much to stand on. Douglas says it'll be dismissed within the month." Clara looked at the door. She looked at Nathan. "He's not going to accept this quietly," she said. "No," Nathan said. "He's not." "He's going to do something," she said. "Probably," Nathan agreed. "Then why are you... You look..." She searched for the word. "Calm." Nathan looked at her. "Because I've been dealing with problems on this land for 15 years, he said, "and the ones that make the most noise right before they leave are the ones that have run out of moves. Raymond Alcott has run out of legal moves. That leaves him with the whisper, and whispers need to be fed." He paused. "I'm going to stop feeding them." "How?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He shifted Emma to his other arm. He looked at Clara with the expression she had come to know as the truest version of his face, the one that existed below all the managed, careful layers, and he said something she was not prepared for. "By giving this town something true to talk about," he said, "instead of something Alcott invented." Clara looked at him. Her heart was doing something she could not make it stop doing. "Nathan," she said carefully, "what are you saying?" He looked at her for a long moment. Emma reached out and grabbed Clara's hand with one small fist and held on. "I'm saying," Nathan said slowly, "that I have spent 2 years telling myself I was done. Done with wanting things. Done with building something with another person." He looked at Emma's hand in Clara's. "And I have spent the last 6 weeks being wrong about that. More wrong than I've been about anything since I decided that first winter could be survived on stubbornness alone." Clara could not breathe. "The ranch is mine," he said. "Emma is mine. The south pasture and the water rights and the fence line and every cold morning are mine, and I will defend every bit of it." He looked at her directly. "I would like if you are willing to have something more to defend." The room was loud around them. The fiddle was going again. Someone laughed near the back. Emma held Clara's hand. Clara looked at Nathan Cole, who had sent for a nanny who had stood at a window in the cold and given her her name back in a single word, who had put his hand over hers and left it there, who had gone to a church social for the first time in 3 years and danced holding his daughter and extended his hand anyway. And she understood that this man had just said the most honest thing she had heard in 6 weeks of honest things. She did not look away. "I am willing," she said. The fiddle played. Outside, the cold was doing what Montana cold did, holding everything in its enormous impartial grip. Stars over the valley. Frost on the road. The long dark of the high plains in December pressing against the warm windows of the church hall. And somewhere on the road into town, Raymond Alcott sat in his hired carriage with his jaw set and his hands on his knees, and he thought about what had just been taken from him. Not Clara. He had never really had Clara. What had been taken from him was the certainty that he could get her back. He sat in the dark and thought about the South Water lease. He thought about Harlan Webb, who was still, if played correctly, in play. He thought about the one thing he hadn't tried yet. The thing he'd been holding back because it was the kind of move that couldn't be taken back, once made the kind of move you only use when you've decided you don't care about aftermath. He hadn't decided that yet. He was deciding it now. He leaned forward and told his driver to take him to the telegraph office. It was late. The office was closed. He knocked until someone answered. He wrote out his message. And in Cedar Hollow, in the warm and ordinary noise of a winter social, Nathan Cole and Clara Whitfield stood together in the crowd and did not know that the worst of it was still coming. They would know by morning. The telegram arrived at the Cole Ranch the following morning before Clara had finished the first pot of coffee. George brought it in from the road, where the telegraph boy had ridden out at first light, and he set it on the kitchen table without a word, which told Clara everything about the expression on the outside of the envelope. George was not a man who dramatized things. When he set something down quietly and left the room, it meant the thing deserved quiet. Nathan came in from the barn 2 minutes later. He saw the envelope. He saw Clara's face. He picked it up, read it, and set it back down on the table. Clara watched him. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone to that particular flat quality, not cold, not angry in the ordinary sense, but the expression of a man who has been hit and is deciding in real time what hitting back looks like. "Tell me," she said. He turned the envelope toward her. She read it. The telegram was from a bank in Boston. It was addressed to Harlan Webb, and it had been forwarded incorrectly or deliberately, Clara couldn't tell which, to the Cole Ranch address. In it, Raymond Alcott's attorney confirmed that a capital arrangement had been agreed upon Webb's signature on a water rights reassignment on the South Valley leases in exchange for Eastern investment capital that would, the telegram said, allow Webb to expand his holdings considerably. Raymond had not given up on the legal claim. He had gone around it. He had bought the one man in Cedar Hollow with the authority to make Nathan's water access a problem, not through the court, not through the whisper, but through money, which was always Raymond's last and most reliable instrument. Clara set the telegram down. "When does this take effect?" she said. "If Webb signs," Nathan said, "the reassignment goes to the county recorder within 30 days. After that, the South Pasture loses its primary water access. The cattle can't run there through winter." He paused. "That pasture carries a third of the herd." Clara understood what that meant. Not ruin, not immediately, but damage, real damage, the kind that compounds through a winter and arrives at spring as something harder to recover from. "He planned this from the beginning," she said. "He planned this when the legal claim failed," Nathan said. "He needed a second structure. He told you that's how he works." "Yes," she said. "I did." She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him for a moment because she needed a moment not to compose herself, but to let the full weight of what she was thinking arrive before she said it. Then she turned around. "This is because of me," she said. "Clara." "Nathan." Her voice was steady. "I brought this into your house, into Emma's house. Whatever Raymond does to this ranch, it is a consequence of my presence here, and I will not pretend otherwise." Nathan looked at her. "Are you leaving?" he said. The question was direct. No performance around it, no softening. Just the question asked like a man who needed the answer and intended to hear it. "No," she said, immediately, without hesitation. Something in his chest released, she could see it, the fractional shift in his shoulders. "Then we deal with it," he said. "How?" she said. He picked up his coat. "Webb hasn't signed yet," he said. "The telegram got here before it got to him, which means we have time. He was already moving toward the door. I'm going to talk to him." "Raymond will have offered him a great deal of money," Clara said. "I know what Raymond offered him," Nathan said. "I've got 15 years in this county. That's worth something too." "Nathan." She crossed the room, stood directly in front of him. "Let me come." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "I started this," she said. "I want to finish it. Not behind the door of this house, with you in front of whoever needs to hear it." A long moment. "All right," he said. They left Emma with George, which Emma registered as a personal grievance, and made known loudly until the sound of the horses faded, and they rode into Cedar Hollow in the sharp cold of a December morning, with the sky pale and enormous overhead. Webb's office was above the dry goods store, 2 rooms with a view of Main Street that Webb used for the particular variety of local business that required a view of who was passing. He was already there when they arrived, which meant either he was an early riser or the telegram situation had already reached him through other channels. He looked at Nathan when they came through the door. He looked at Clara. His expression went through 3 things quickly: surprise, calculation, and a studied neutral that settled over the first 2. "Nathan," he said. "Miss Whitfield." "Harlan," Nathan said. He set the forwarded telegram on Webb's desk without preamble. Webb looked at it. His jaw moved. "That was meant for me," he said. "It was delivered to my address," Nathan said. "I don't know whether that was an accident or Alcott's way of starting a conversation. Either way, we're having it." Webb sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nathan, the capital he's offering would allow me to expand the east acreage I've been trying to acquire for 3 years. You know what that land means to my operation." "I know what it means," Nathan said. "The water rights reassignment is a technicality," Webb said. "You could run a secondary line from Harlan." Nathan's voice was quiet. Still that flat, certain quiet. "We have known each other for 15 years. We have had this water rights disagreement for 3 of those 15 years, and it has never gone to legal action, because we are both men who understand that neighbor disputes settled by law make enemies where there used to be neighbors." Webb said nothing. "I am asking you," Nathan said, "to tell me what it would take to settle the south lease between us the right way so that no man from Boston has a stake in my land or yours." Webb turned the telegram over on his desk. "He's offering 15,000, Webb said, bluntly, the number of a man who has decided that transparency serves him better here than performance. Nathan didn't blink. "What's the east acreage actually worth to you?" Nathan said. "Not the money. The operation." Webb was quiet. "It doubles my grazing range," he said. "I've been at the edge of what this property can carry for 2 years." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have 1,200 acres of the North Plateau I haven't developed. Running a fence line up there has been on my list for 5 years, and I haven't had the time or the labor." He paused. "I would be willing to negotiate a shared use arrangement on the North Plateau through the winter grazing season. 5 years renewable. In exchange for a settled water rights agreement on the South lease, one that doesn't involve Raymond Alcott's capital or his signature." Webb stared at him. Clara watched Webb's face and saw the exact moment the calculation landed. 1,200 acres of the North Plateau in shared use was in practical terms considerably more valuable than the east acreage Raymond's money was intended to buy. Webb knew the plateau. He had ridden it. He had wanted access to it for as long as he'd wanted the east acreage. "That's a significant offer," Webb said carefully. "I know what it is," Nathan said. "You'd need to work out terms with Douglas." "Douglas can have the paperwork ready by end of week," Nathan said. Webb looked at the telegram. He looked at Nathan. He looked at Clara, and in his expression was something she recognized, the look of a man revising a story he'd been told about someone holding the revised version against the original and finding the original insufficient. "Alcott's going to be unhappy," Webb said. "I expect so," Nathan said. "He may try another channel." "He's welcome to try," Nathan said. "He's running out of them." Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the telegram. He put it in his desk drawer. He extended his hand to Nathan. "End of week," he said. "Tell Douglas to draft something fair." Nathan shook it. They rode back to the ranch in the cold, and neither of them spoke for the first mile, because some things need the silence around them before words can find the right shape. Then Clara said, "The North Plateau." "Yes," Nathan said. "That's a significant piece of what you've been building," she said. "Shared use for 5 years," he said. "I still own it, and I've been meaning to fence it for 5 years without getting to it." He glanced at her. "Sometimes the right trade is the one that solves 2 problems at once." She looked at him. "You solved my problem," she said. "I solved a problem that was on my land," he said, "which makes it mine to solve too." She was quiet. "Nathan," she said. "Clara," he said. "Raymond is still in Cedar Hollow," she said. "He received the telegram. He knows the claim failed. He knows Webb didn't sign." "Yes?" Nathan said. "He's going to come to the ranch," she said. "Probably." "Today," she said. Nathan looked at the road ahead. "Probably," he said again. She was right. Raymond came that afternoon. He did not arrive in the hired carriage this time. He arrived alone on horseback, which Clara understood immediately as a deliberate choice. The carriage was a statement of resources, but the horse was a statement of intention. He was not here to perform. He was here to have the conversation that all the performance had been avoiding. Nathan was in the yard when Raymond rode up. Clara was on the porch, which was where she had been for the past hour, because she had known he was coming, and she had decided clearly without drama that she was not going back inside. Raymond dismounted. He looked at Nathan, then at Clara on the porch. He walked toward her. Nathan moved not fast, but definite, and placed himself in the space between the yard and the porch steps. "I'd like to speak with Clara," Raymond said. "You can speak with her from there," Nathan said. Raymond looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, something genuinely human moved across Raymond Alcott's face. Not anger, not calculation. Something closer to the thing that lives underneath both of those in the part of a person that exists before strategy. He looked at Clara. "You've made your choice clear," he said. "I understand that. But I want you to understand what you're choosing." "I understand exactly what I'm choosing," Clara said. "I understood it before you arrived. I understand it better now." "This man," Raymond started. "This man," Clara said, "has not once in 6 weeks told me how to dress, or who to speak to, or what my opinions should be. He has not managed me. He has not performed patience while waiting for me to become someone more convenient." She held Raymond's gaze. "You told me you were offering me something. What you were actually offering me was a smaller version of myself maintained at your convenience. I declined then. I'm declining now." Raymond was still. The Raymond she had known for 2 years would have had an answer for that. He had always had an answer, smooth, reasonable, the next move, already loaded. He didn't have one now. He stood in Nathan Cole's yard in the December cold and looked at Clara Whitfield standing on Nathan Cole's porch, and for the first time in all of it, he had nothing. "The breach of promise claim," he said finally. Quieter. "Will be dismissed," Clara said. "Douglas Marsh filed the response this morning." Raymond looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. He didn't need to. Raymond stood there for another moment. Then he said to Clara, "You were always more than you believed yourself to be." It was the truest thing he had ever said to her. She held it. "I know that now," she said. Raymond nodded once. He turned. He got back on his horse. He rode down the long road away from the Cole ranch, and Clara watched him go, and she felt the weight she had carried since Boston. The specific weight of Raymond Alcott's certainty that he knew better than she did what her life should look like. She felt it lift. Not dramatically, not all at once. Like a door opened in a room that had been closed too long. Just air, just clean, cold Montana air moving through. Nathan came up the porch steps and stood beside her. They watched the road together until Raymond was gone. Then Nathan said, "You all right?" "Yes," she said. "Sure." "Completely," she said. He turned and looked at her. She looked back. Emma's voice came from inside the particular sound she made when she had been left with George long enough and had decided that the situation required correction. Clara almost moved toward the door. Nathan caught her hand. She stopped. He held her hand the way he had at the kitchen table, firmly, without apology, the way a man holds something he's decided is his to hold. "Clara Whitfield," he said. "Nathan Cole," she said. He looked at her with the open face, the true face, the one she had been watching come forward over 6 weeks, like the sun coming back after the longest kind of winter. "I sent for a nanny," he said. "I know," she said. "I would like, if you're willing," he said, "to send for something else." She felt the warmth of his hand. She felt the cold air on her face. She heard Emma inside, very sure of what she wanted, as she always was. "I'm willing," Clara said. He brought her hand up. He pressed it once firmly, like a man confirming something to himself that he was now certain of. Then Emma escalated her position loudly, and they both went inside. Together. The winter moved forward, the way Montana winters do, long and cold and full of the ordinary labor of keeping things alive that matter enough to keep. The South lease was settled by end of week, as Nathan had said. Douglas filed the final dismissal on the breach of promise claim before Christmas. Raymond Alcott checked out of the Cedar Hollow Hotel on a Tuesday morning without speaking to anyone and took the eastbound train. And Cedar Hollow watched him go with the quiet satisfaction of a community that has declined to be rearranged by an outsider. The whisper died. Not because anyone refuted it directly. It died the way Dorothy had said it would, because the people with their own eyes had enough to look at, and what they saw was simple and plain and true. A rancher who had been closed for 2 years open again. A woman who had arrived with one suitcase and nowhere to go and had stayed. A baby with enormous dark eyes who held both of their hands at once and held on. On a Sunday in late January in the Cedar Hollow Church with Bill Briggs and Dorothy Walsh as witnesses, Nathan Cole and Clara Whitfield were married. It was not a grand ceremony. Emma sat through it in the white dress and grabbed the minister's sleeve at a critical moment, which the minister took in stride, because ministers in frontier towns develop flexibility, and which Nathan handled with one hand while repeating his vows with the other, which Clara considered to be the most accurate preview of their future she could have arranged. Afterward, on the church steps, in the January cold, Dorothy Walsh pressed Clara's hands and said, "I told you he'd come." "You told me to ask him," Clara said. "I asked." "Same thing," Dorothy said, which was probably true. George shook Nathan's hand and said nothing, which meant everything, which was George. They drove home in the cold. Emma fell asleep between them on the wagon seat, her head against Clara's arm and her feet against Nathan's leg, taking up more than her share of the space in the way that babies do when they have decided the world should arrange itself around them, which in this case it had. The ranch was warm when they arrived. George had seen to the fire before the ceremony. The house that had been silent for 2 years was full of the small sounds of a life being lived, the creak of the boards, the wind at the windows, the steady press of warmth against the cold. Clara carried Emma upstairs. She laid her in the crib. Emma sighed in her sleep and turned her head and reached out the way she always did, even sleeping, always reaching. Clara stayed for a moment in the dark of the nursery. She thought about a train platform. She thought about a coin pressed into her palm. She thought about the long trip from Boston with one suitcase, and nowhere she was certain she was going, only the knowledge that she was done, staying where she didn't belong. She had been looking for a place where she was treated like a person. She had found something larger than that. She had found a place where she was known. Nathan was downstairs when she came down, standing by the fire in the parlor with his coat off, and he turned when he heard her on the stairs. "She's down," he said. "She's down," Clara said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside, Montana held its long breath, dark and cold and full of stars too many to name. Inside, the fire burned. Inside, the curtains were open. They had always been open now. Nathan crossed the room. He put both hands on her face the way a man does when he wants to make certain he is seeing what he thinks he is seeing. "You're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. He pressed his forehead to hers. Clara Whitfield. Clara Cole closed her eyes and felt the weight of the thing she had arrived at, not the destination she'd been aiming for. Because she hadn't been aiming. She had only been moving, putting one foot in front of the other in the particular faith of someone who has decided to keep going. And this was where going had brought her. Home. To a man who had forgotten he could be found, and a child who had reached for her before either of them knew what it meant, and a ranch in Montana that had been silent for 2 years and would not be silent again. Nathan had sent for a nanny. Fate had sent Clara Whitfield, and on the coldest ranch in Cedar Hollow, in the middle of the longest winter, the 2 loneliest people in the territory had built the thing that outlasts everything else. Not grand, not sudden, not arrived at without cost, but real and certain and lasting as the land itself. They had built a home, and neither of them would ever be alone again.